When you first start on your wealth building journey, it's important that you try to avoid as many mistakes as possible because when you're young, you're not making nearly as much income as you will later on in life. With that being said, there's usually a few key things that end up being a bit more expensive than most people realize. So they end up buying them and then over time spending a lot more money than they think, which then impacts them later down the road. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Tyler and I make videos on ways to improve your life that I wish that someone taught me when I was younger. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about 3 common things that are a lot more expensive than most people realize and that can impact your wealth building journey. If you would like to avoid these, let's go ahead and jump into the video. Now, I might get some hate for this one, but one of the main things that's going to end up costing you a bit more money than you realize is going to be getting a pet. And that's coming from someone who has both a cat and a dog. Pets are a lot more expensive than most people realize at first. First off, when you're adopting a pet, unless you're getting it straight from a shelter that doesn't have really high fees or maybe they're overcrowded, you're going to be spending a decent amount of money just for the initial adoption fees and then any of the vet workups that you have to do after the fact to make sure that the animal is going to be happy and healthy and ready for adoption. This usually comes out to a couple $100s. And if you're not prepared for that, then you shouldn't be trying to put it on a credit card just so you can get a pet. Next up is all the things that you have to buy in order to make sure you're actually taking care of your pet and it's staying happy and healthy. That's going to be making sure that you get quality food as well as toys, so that way you are making sure that their life is enriched and that they're happy in the home that they have. Now, for a lot of people, those costs might seem relatively inexpensive, which is true. In the grand scheme of things, those costs don't add up to much. Where things end up getting a lot more expensive than most people anticipate is when it comes to emergency vet visits. Pretty much right after graduating college, our cat had an emergency. He started struggling to use the bathroom and his ability to eat and drink started going downhill quickly. First, we spent a ton of money just on the front end trying to figure out what was going on with him. And then once that wasn't working, we had to spend a lot of money on an emergency trip to the vet ER in order to have emergency surgery performed to save his life. If we hadn't had that surgery, he would have died. And in the grand scheme of things, it ended up costing us over $7,000, which to some people might not seem a lot. But for people who had only been in the workforce for a few months, $7,000 was a significant amount of money. This ended up having to be put on a credit card that we luckily were able to get a deal on that had no interest, and we had to pay it off over time. But I've had friends in very similar situations where it ended up costing them a lot more money than just the $7,000. And that's the whole thing, right? It is perfectly okay for you to want to get a pet. They are great companions to have and they can offer a lot of emotional support and stability, especially when people are stressed. However, if you're not going to be able to afford when an emergency like this happens, then you shouldn't get one. When you are suddenly in that situation, you have to make a decision where you are choosing between the cost of the surgery or the life of the animal. And obviously, if you don't have the money for it, you might not be able to make that decision. This is an incredibly difficult decision to make, so most people will either go into debt in order to save their animal or unfortunately be emotionally traumatized when they can't afford to save them. Personally, I really don't recommend getting a pet until you've had some time to build up some savings, so when situations like this arise, you're able to do the best thing for your animal. The next thing that ends up being a lot more expensive than most people realize are going to be weddings. Now, most people realize that weddings are going to be one of the more expensive things that they do in their life, so they do end up saving some money. However, whatever money that you think you need, take that and times it by 1.5, because pretty much everything that you get for this wedding is going to be marked up just because it is a wedding. This obviously includes the food, the florist, the decorations, pretty much all of it ends up stacking up a lot faster than you realize. Now, it is possible for you to have a wedding that is cheaper. There's a lot of things that you can do yourself, or you can buy cheaper decorations for in order to make your wedding more affordable. But a key thing to remember here is, yes, this is a very special day that hopefully only happens once in your life. However, it is not worth going into debt over. Make sure that if you are going to go for a wedding, that you set a budget and stick to it. This often is going to involve hard conversations where you have to decide to cut certain things that you may have wanted for your wedding. But another really important thing to remember here is the wedding is about you guys. It's about you and your special day. If people are complaining or noticing the decorations at your wedding, then do you really want to have them there in the first place? Focus on your friends, your family, and your partner that you're getting married to, and that will help take a lot of the stress off of the expensiveness of the day. Something my wife and I did that actually ended up saving us a decent amount of money was getting an all-inclusive wedding venue. This meant that the wedding venue handled all of the vendors such as the caterer, the photographer, as well as the DJ. And this made it so we weren't having to find and specifically source all these individual components, which would stack up over time. This allowed us to buy one full package and prevented us from spending more money on other things that we really didn't have the budget for. However, if you have the time on your hands, you can take the time to make a really great wedding where you source the vendors yourself at the price points that you want. It just might take some more time and searching to do so. Now, the final big thing that ends up costing people way more money than they realize is keeping up with the latest and greatest thing. And this is in reference to multiple things. This is in reference to cars. This is in reference to phones. Trying to get and keep up with the newest version of all of these things ends up costing you a lot more money than you initially realize. Let's say that you go the route of renting whatever it is. The problem with renting the device versus owning it is that you are on the hook for whatever contract it is that you sign up for. And usually with those kinds of contracts, if you decide that you want to break them, it's going to cost you a pretty hefty fee up front. The other issue with this is when you get to the end of the contract, you have to figure something else out. You either have to buy yourself something new, or you have to build another lease. Both of these options are gonna end up costing you more money in the long term. Additionally, when you're renting or buying the newest things, those are obviously going to be the most expensive versions of those things. Let's talk about a phone plan, for example. A lot of times, if you're switching to a new carrier, they're gonna offer you a new phone. And they usually give you 2 to 3 options. If you go with the newest iPhone, you're usually gonna pay a couple $100s per month just to get to use that iPhone. But if you go with the more economy smartphones, such as like a Motorola, for instance, you end up paying $0 per month because of the deal that they're running. Now, will there be some differences between the phones? Yes, the camera might not be as high quality and you might have a little bit lower storage. But I personally have owned both. I have had a Samsung S23. The only reason I got that was for the camera, and I've owned a Motorola. And personally, beyond the camera, I didn't notice that much difference in performance between the two phones. Now, part of that is because I'm not a techie, but if you aren't someone who is really into that stuff, you're not gonna notice the difference. So is it really worth the couple $100 per month difference in what you're going to be paying? Probably not. Save that money and put it towards something that you really want to, like saving for a nice vacation or investing. Another factor to consider when you're getting the most expensive thing is the cost of maintenance and insurance on that is usually going to be much higher. If you're interested, just quickly Google what the difference between car insurance on a brand new 2026 car would be versus a car that has 10 years on it and maybe 100,000 miles. You would be surprised at how much of a difference it makes. Now take that cost compounded over time for all the months that you have to pay it, and it adds up. So between the increased cost of maintenance and insurance, as well as just the upfront cost that it is to buy something that's brand new, getting something new and not used ends up usually being a lot more expensive than people originally think. So those are 3 things that end up being more expensive than most people realize. And if you feel like you learned something helpful here, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to join me along in this self-improvement journey. If you're interested in more videos like this one where I talk about money-related topics, be sure to check out this video right here about major money milestones to hit in your 20s. If you're more interested in my most recent stuff, be sure to check out this video right here. But until the next time, this is Tyler Warlow, signing off.